Why should Instagram have all the art fun?
Why not bring the art conversation to LinkedIn?
I'm Melissa, an artist and a culture sleuth.
I'm Nina. I'm a visual storyteller, a LinkedIn content creator, and a photographer.
Creativity is as vital to a successful business venture as it is to an artist.
So, why is the conversation about art and business segregated to different media platforms?
That's what led us to create a live show on LinkedIn.
We interview fascinating experts and explore art and how it relates to business, technology, and education.
Welcome to An Artful Life, curious conversations about the ways humans make and use art.
And here we are with our 10th edition already. We're in the double digits now, imagine, of An Artful Life. And today we have Michelle Holliday with us, founder of Thrivable World. We're going to have a really interesting conversation. I'm very excited, actually. And Melissa, why don't you give us a short intro?
I would love to.
Where did we find Michelle?
Hello to both of you and welcome. And I'm so happy Michelle is here. We met 10 years ago through a shared love of art and a history based in the Soviet Union / Russia. Some of you may know that I went to art school in Russia. I married a man from Russia. Michelle, as a young businesswoman, was in global international trade in Moscow with such big names as, for example, Heinz. And I think I understand it that your exposure to the way business is done globally made you think that some improvements could be made. And you've branched out, and we'll hear more about that later. And then we met subsequently when I was contacted by Michelle and her husband, Alan, to do a workshop in Spain with their daughter, the very talented Sunny. So we had the opportunity to spend a month together in a golden Andalusian summer doing what we love. And Michelle finished her book there, which is, it's a long title, so I'm going to read it. The Age of Thrivability, Vital Perspectives and Practices for a Better World. And God knows we need a better world.
There we are.
I love the book. I've read it twice. And so when you agreed to be on our show, I was thrilled. And I wonder if you would begin by telling our audience a little bit about Thrivability for those who don't know.
Yes, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. It's such an important topic. And Nina, I'm thrilled to meet you. And Melissa, so much love. So much love for you and everything you are. So let's see. Maybe you asked me to talk about thrivability. In a nutshell, it is the ability to thrive. And we expand that to apply it to all life, to us, to our projects and organizations as living ecologies. And we want them to be able to thrive as well, and communities and the biosphere. And this is sort of an obvious thing, of course. Who wouldn't want life to be able to thrive at all of those levels? But it's actually quite a revolutionary concept within a dominant worldview that tells us only productivity and profitability matter, that we're not worthy of thriving. You probably haven't worked hard enough to deserve to thrive. and that, somehow that's not a reasonable goal. So in a nutshell, that's what brings me to this focus on thrivability.
I believe I remember from reading the book that there was your route passed through a deep dive into biology.
Yes. My experience at Heinz and Coca-Cola, as you suspected, helped me see how the story and the experience we have of business is missing something really vital and fundamental in internal culture, in our experience of working within companies like these, in the relationship we have with customers and community. My sense was that something really important is missing in the story we have about the whole context of work. What I started to notice over the years was that we have a dominant worldview that tells us we're not worthy of thriving, but more than that, it tells us that everything in the universe operates like a machine, and the machine should never stop. And there's never enough. More is always better. It tells us that we're separate from each other, separate from nature, separate from the organization, that we are human resources to be put into the machine and churned somehow so that some product is spit out the other side to a
Wow, I'd
passive
never thought of that term in that way, but wow,
Mm.
as a resource.
human capital, like
Yeah.
the language.
The language, yeah.
When you start to pay attention to the language of the machine, it's everywhere. And it's so pervasive that we don't even realize that we've bought into this story. So if we have a story that tells us everything operates like a machine and we are just resources to be churned within that machine, then what else is there to the story? My sense was that there's also life somehow. We aren't only machines.
Yeah.
There's also life. And I wanted to understand, so what is that? And I talked about, after leaving Coca-Cola, I went into organizational development and working with leadership and systems, organizational culture. I thought maybe I can fix that part of this flawed story. So I talked there about the human spirit. And in the 1990s in Washington, D.C., maybe as today, there was no interest in talking about the human spirit. People would say, try the nonprofits. They're into that kind of thing. But the nonprofits were trying to become more business-like. So they would say that the human spirit doesn't have any place in business. And I thought, how does that make sense? But what do I even mean by the human spirit? Actually, what I have some sense, but my sense was that it has something to do with life. And so I did an independent research deep dive into biology to see, what does it mean for something to be alive? And what does it take for something that's alive to thrive? And is there anything we can learn from that within our context, within our organizations? And of course there is. There's lots of guidance and inspiration and a more complete and useful story.
I find it also, it triggers hope, which is so necessary. That the machine version and the human capital version sort of makes me feel like all I can hope to do is to fight and struggle for my people and my house and my bottom line, and that's all I can possibly hope to do. That the rest is hopeless.
Exactly.
But your version is much more generous.
And generous is such a good word, actually.
Yeah.
As more of us realize this mechanistic story of reducing everything to its parts in order to predict and control, and seeing ourselves as separate and competing, that story is leading us to all of the crises we face in the world. We can trace all of them. Every major problem humanity faces can be traced back to that mechanistic, reductionist story of extraction and domination and control. So as more of us are recognizing this, we're seeing signs of a bigger story that doesn't negate the mechanistic story. Every living system has mechanistic aspects, but that's not the whole story. That's not even the most important part of the story. So as we're recognizing it, we see signs, which is what I write about in my book. And one of them is this term, this concept that you may not have come across, but it's regeneration. And regenerative. So it's most common in agriculture. That we can be in relationship with the land, a reciprocal partnership with the land to support the soil's own regenerative capacity forever. And it's spreading into other parts of our lives as well, into tourism and how communities approach hosting each other first, into every realm of business. And this term regeneration is such a lovely one. It fundamentally is a synonym for healing. The body's regenerative capacity is its capacity to continually heal itself. And I find there's such a beautiful connection also to generativity and creativity and generosity, coming back to where you started, and it sparked this for me, that it's fundamentally a generous way of being in the world. So yes. Lots and lots of hope there.
There is.
Mm-hmm. So, if you're talking about getting into, more in tune with or being one again with nature, how does the aspect of art, since this is a show about an artful life, how do you integrate that? How does that make sense in your ecosystem?
There are so many ways that art is vital. And part of it I was just touching on, that if we see the world as a machine, there is no place for art. It is irrelevant. It is subjective and therefore not real.
Yeah.
Only the objective is real in that story. But if we see that we are part of a living, emergent process, part of nature, as you said, which is fundamentally generative and regenerative and creative, growing ever more complex and developing ever new capabilities, then art has a place. Then we are creative beings. So that's one answer. Another is that in exploring what it means to be alive and what it takes to thrive, I noticed that there are a core set of fertile conditions that have to be present everywhere, that have to be cultivated well enough if life is to thrive.
I love that term and the way you use it in your book.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. In fact, thinking about this conversation, I realized you never talk about, I never hear people talk about artists as productive. We talk about artists as prolific. And I thought, why is that? What's the difference? You know? And because Melissa, I remember you turn out paintings at an astonishing speed or frequency, but I wouldn't say you're productive, prolific. So I looked up the etymology this morning, and it comes from the same root as fertile. It's about being fertile and giving birth. It's not just about producing, about kind of going through the motions. So fertile conditions, and I'll name the core four just briefly, that we need diverse parts in order for a system to thrive. And we need the parts to be connected in rich flow of learning and relationship. We need them to come together in wholeness so that new things become possible. New characteristics emerge. And where I'm going with it is the last one is that there is life. There is some spark that animates and integrates by itself. And I feel that art is the way that life expresses itself through us, that the artist is speaking on behalf of life as a channel, as a sort of this deep taproot into the most profound levels of life, beyond what the intellect can process at a reductive level. But this way of expressing what wants to come to life, what wants to be seen and understood, there are things that can only be expressed through art. So these are some of the answers. And let's see I'm curious what your thoughts are on art in a world that is able to thrive.
Nina, what do you think?
As I'm hearing you talk, I keep thinking of the book that I just started reading that another guest of ours recommended, Your Brain on Art, by Susan and Ivy, and both last names total blank, so forgive me. And it talks about the same thing in a very different way, but it talks about how through art, I think there is a reiterative and a regenerative aspect to art that also on a very biological level helps us renew our brain cells and helps us reset our be it our moods or there's so much going on when we do engage with art, right? So that's what I'm sort of thinking about.
Exactly.
And I have thought of art as the repository of meaning, of the meaning of culture, of the emotional journey of humans. That we are archiving human experience.
Can I asked Melissa, you stepped away, and I asked if I could share something. This is something. Can you see that?
Yeah, I'll add it. There we go.
Oh.
Okay. This is one of your lovely, breathtaking pastels, Melissa. And
thank you.
And something I remembered you saying, life is inherently meaningful and humans are creatures capable of majesty.
Hmm.
This is good.
Thank you.
Melissa. And imagine what kind of world we would be in if we all believed this.
Yeah.
And if we structured our communities around that belief, if we asked always, how would we live into this meeting or this community plan or this project if we really wanted to live into that belief?
May I go on a small tangent to that point? There is a study where one of the big universities in the USA, I think it was Yale, wanted to study why Holocaust prison guards and Germans in general, and in other human situations, I'm not targeting Germany in particular, why are humans willing to do horrible things? And so they created a study with a buzzer and pain where it has a name.
It does. And I
I've
can't,
heard of it, yeah.
maybe the Stanford study, but yeah.
Yes, and the result of this study was it had to be stopped because I'm thinking that it was 65-70% of people, when they were told by a person in authority to do horrible things, they would do it, and they believed that they were harming to the point of deep injury the other people in the study. And what was interesting to me was the makers of the study took from this that humans aren't normally evil and weak. Instead of thinking, here are these 20 to 40% of people who will stand up for their principles and do majestic things. Why are they different? And here's what's possible. It was like I've never understood why in that study people weren't fascinated by the refusals.
Yeah.
Right, and focused on the
Yeah.
people who faithfully executed on, well, because that was probably where they wanted to understand, you know, where do the masses go wrong, right? I mean, there's so many. I mean, it starts with Elias Canetti's Massen, no clue what that title is in English, for which he won a Nobel Prize in literature. You know, it's just the sort of the, and I think that's what I'm hearing with the thrivability for you, Michelle, is we're talking not about a single human being here. We're talking about a group, a community, and then the world, right?
Exactly.
So there's like this onion principle. And by the way, something that I'm living and breathing and really experiencing very deeply, and I always put it off as woo-woo, and I've learned not to. I'm in the community of a lot of small business owners that are coaches, consultants, most of them women, most of them my age, our age, and up. Couple of youngsters in there, and but it is a community that is serving. Yes, we want to make money. Yes, we need to support our families and/or want to go on trips, or in my case, you know, go to crazy locales to take great pictures. But there is this really strong aspect of serving and thriving for the greater good, and not just for a bottom line. The bottom line actually doesn't even figure into it in a way.
This is so important. And this is another way that art has a role to play. There are the artists who I think, from my experience of my daughter, show up as channels, show up with an attunement to life's expression. And there are those of us who don't show up with that, or at least not to that degree, but we can invite art in, we can invite imagination and creativity into the spaces that we cultivate. And this is what I think we need to be really intentional about more than ever, to create our projects, our organizations, and our communities as practice grounds for a more thrivable world, and to invite creativity, art, play into these spaces, because this is the only way we will expand the imagination enough to conceive of different ways of being. The nature of a worldview, of a paradigm, is to convince us this is the only way. This is human nature.
Yeah.
So we need some real effort and fertile conditions to be able to stretch beyond that imagining.
Michelle, what are some of the components of fertile conditions? And this would be applicable to artists, but really every being.
For me, it comes back to those conditions, those design principles, like life's universal design principles that I named. So in a conversation, we can make sure that each of us is able to bring our unique perspectives and to be nourished in the process as diverse parts. We can tend to the flow of relationship, make sure that we can hear each other and that we speak the same language and that we have some level of respect and even friendship. And the more we cultivate that belonging and that relationship, the more likely this is to be a thrivable conversation, so that we thrive individually and that the whole that is us thrives and everything that it touches thrives as well. If we talk about something that really matters, that brings us together in wholeness, in human context, what enables wholeness, the emergence of new possibility, is shared purpose or shared story. So if we're here not just to talk about my pen, then, but if we talk instead about something deeply meaningful, as we are, then more becomes possible. And then life, if we not only don't insist on choreographing it, which I love that you didn't share the questions in advance. You said, let's not talk too much. Let's follow life's inspiration, the spirit of life, where it takes us. This is one of the fertile conditions. And if we could bring in movement, if we could bring in beauty, if we were in a breathtaking spot like Andalusia together, then just magic would happen, and there would be benefit and brilliance beyond what we could have imagined. This is generative and regenerative. So those are the conditions that we can cultivate. And the last thing I'll share actually is that there's also place. There's the context, the soil, and that plays a role as well. It's more difficult in a call like this, an online call. But if we were in Andalusia, we could really draw on what can only happen in that context and what might only be able to serve that context as well. And I think that's true of artists as well.
It's interesting with our previous guest last month, we talked with Peter Ralston, who's a photographer like Nina from Maine, a beautiful photographer and such a lovely man. But Dowd and I are artists who jump from place to place wanting to absorb as many spots on this beautiful planet as we can. And we're fed by the change and exploration. He's the reverse. He's a Maine artist and maybe 50 square miles of Maine. And he's Maine. But in both of our cases, place is nourishing.
I love it.
In opposite ways, in a way, even, right?
Yes, and Nina, you're very nourished by place.
Yeah.
In a more dramatic way, or
yeah. I mean, for me, it's the Swiss Alps. It's just where my soul resides. I always like to say, and I'm discovering that if I just sort of drive around and look for stuff to photograph, that's not me. That's not my kind of photography. I find that for me, the beauty comes at me if I stay in one place or I get to know one place really well, because I'm not looking at the big epic. I'm looking at the everyday beauty that just hits you sort of upside the head, and you need to be there to experience it and see it. And very often that happens in relationship to what happened the day before, the minute before, or the hour before. So it's sitting there and waiting for the clouds to roll in. That's best done in a place you know really well. So, yeah. And I think, I mean, there's a place for for all different kinds, but for me, I'm definitely very place oriented as well.
I love that you're pointing to the ability to see, to see a place, to see beauty or not, just broadly to see. And I feel that is what it means to cherish, to honor, to be open to participating with a place, to belong. And those are, I think, at the essence of this shift that we're all looking for towards thrivability. It's a belonging in the world. And participation and to live a life of meaning, as you pointed to in that quote that I shared from you, Melissa. I see that so much of the radicalization in the world is really a search for belonging. So imagine if an artful existence were more widespread, then that wouldn't be such a pull, right?
No.
So many ways.
There's a beauty. Go ahead, Nina.
Sorry, as important as seeing is, I mean, I think the listening and the deep listening, I mean, I guess they're both super important, but, or maybe because I'm not a good listener and a really good seer, maybe I'm a little bit more curious about what the listening part is. Is it a listening of your actual immediate surrounding, or a listening on a completely different level?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
For you, Nina, it's being in a place you love and know well, and waiting 3 hours for the cloud to be in the right place, and meanwhile absorbing the goodness. For me, a parallel would be when painting portraits. So many portrait artists are good at painting a portrait from photographs. But for me, it's spending the time with that person. And now that there is photography, it's hard to convince a client or a sitter into actually sitting. But when I painted your daughter from life, and that would never have happened in the same way from a photograph. Her 13-year-old self with the thoughts churning and the aspirations in the same room is different than holding a piece of paper up or looking at a computer screen. And about 3 summers ago in Spain, our neighbor, a dear friend, was surprised with a divorce, and just so sad. And kind of a result of him being unable to work and being a generous soul, we painted his portrait over 3 weeks, every afternoon when the right light was right. And sitting there for 3 weeks for a couple of hours a day, that got a different kind of portrait because of the breathing and the talking than would have ever happened from a photograph. The slowing down for deep observation and welcoming experience matters to me.
Yes. And this is part of the shift as well. There's the shift from a mechanistic story that only operates on clock time and sort of knowable, predictable, regular time, where faster is always better. And that doesn't go away, but there's also Chronos time, where there's a right time, there's a ripeness.
I don't know what Chronos time is.
Chronos, Chronos. It's an ancient Greek additional concept of time that when a painting is finished. I maybe I'm not sure, but
yes,
you decide anyway.
Yes,
and that's not because it's 5 o'clock.
Right.
It's because you have a sense of it. So there's a different sense and experience of time. Nina, you were nodding. Maybe have you heard this term before?
I've been introduced to it by one or two of the books that my woo-woo friends recommended. The Big Leap being one of them, and they talk about. But by the way, wonderful book. It's just like yay thick, and you read it in an hour or two. And they talk about Chronos time and how it just shifts your thinking around also the infiniteness or the finiteness of time and how it relates to you living your life and rushing or not rushing and your blood pressure. And all that kind of stuff.
Exactly. So as we convene people, Nina, your network of coaches and consultants, if you expand your understanding, if we expand our understanding of time, we can give a conversation the time it needs, or recognize it seems to be over. So let's not belabor it. So this is part of the shift in story and the shift in role from being only managers of things that can be controlled to being gardeners and stewards in a responsive relationship with something that's fundamentally alive and creative, a conversation, a being, a project, a community.
Yeah, I love that. And we are language, right? And I love that very subtle shift of not being managers, not using that very male-dominated language that we are so used to, and moving to this much softer and nurturing language of nurturing, supporting, being of service. And I think that just makes such a huge difference just in your daily beings with others, right? In your nervous system.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. Exactly. Our bodies are in it. Yeah, Melissa.
Oh, I keep leaping in. We're a show about art on a business platform. So
Okay.
we're also always curious about the intersection of culture and money.
Mhm.
And pricing in the art world is a big deal and really weird.
Mhm.
And so on the one hand, if we're putting a filter of thrivability over artists, on the one hand, artists would want to contribute to a thriving culture and play their part. On the other hand, how do you think about pricing and how they get paid? And
Mhm.
on the one hand, some artworks sell for $42 million and other people, are glad to get their money back out. In a thrivable world, how do you think about that exchange of lucre?
I think of it as more of a revered exchange of gifts, more of a flow of meaning and generosity. So I will often host public convenings and invite people to contribute what feels generous.
Mhm.
In the practice of generosity, can we make this part of the practice? And I always get more money that way than if I name the price. So I wrote an article about it. Maybe I can share it
Well,
afterwards, but
I hope you will.
there's a whole movement around the gift economy.
Yep.
But I think we actually have to make sure that we've expanded the story enough so that
Mm.
it's not just I give it and trust that this is nice, but can we shift the story behind it, behind this exchange, so that it's cultivating a more thrivable world between us somehow? I also want to mention how I have paid artists to be part of my work. And several things come to mind, several people. One, and this wasn't me paying them, but the client paid an artist in a coalition of museums that I write about in the book that are all nature museums here in Montreal. My involvement was to help them come together as one entity. They had been merged administratively. And so we explored listening for the voice of the whole. Nina, you were talking about listening, and this was the process. What is it that holds them together or that could? And the director, who was quite visionary and came from the world of ballet and circus, he hired an artist to be in residence with no particular mandate beyond be here with us, share what you would share. And it made a tangible, noticeable difference. The exhibits became far more creative, far more interactive, far more meaningful. And ultimately, where that set of museums had been subject to continuous city budget cuts, they were part of the municipality owned by the city of Montreal, which was always doing budget cuts. That organization came to be protected only because they were so valued, so clearly special and valuable that no one dared to cut the budget of these precious museums with their artful ways of being. I also regularly work with graphic recorders, and that is people who will draw the conversation as it's happening.
I love those.
Yeah, and sometimes it's with some words, but often it's with pictures, and it's so incredibly valuable. It's inspiring, it's movement, and it's something different to see typed notes and to see it expressed in a holistic way with art. And the last thing I'll mention is working for several years with a man who played. He sadly died not long ago, but he played the piano improvisationally to reflect the mood of the moment.
Ooh.
And it was so powerful and helped to advance conversations just enormously, really shifted what was possible in those conversations. So those are some examples of ways that artists are paid in my line of work, and it is priceless.
Yeah, I love graphic artists that paint the conversation. I've been in a few meetings with people like that, and it's so simple and yet such a deep art form, because you're not just you're listening. I mean, it's like you're doing so many things simultaneously, and you have to do them fast and you have to do them well.
Mhm.
I'm in awe of those artists.
That's some listening.
Yeah,
Like to
yeah,
hear
yeah, sure.
the themes and threads as they're emerging.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Melissa, I think you had a question about a story which I'm really, really curious about the company of cleaners.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm hoping, Michelle, that I can trigger your memory and you can tell the story so I don't have to give much away. In your book, you have a chapter about some people you worked with, and they had a cleaning service, and they had a very particular approach to their work that made them special. Do you know who?
I do. Yeah. And here's another dear friend who died, sadly, not long ago, but or a few years ago. Tolu Ilesanmi is his name, and his company was called Zenith Cleaners. And he brought just a very profound philosophy to this, that cleaning is not something shameful. He would introduce himself as a cleaner, though he has an MBA and worked in banking previously.
Wow.
But he proudly shared that he's a cleaner because he felt that something that has the power to reveal beauty and truth and potential couldn't possibly be shameful. How could that be?
Yeah.
So he called it cleaning as practice.
That's the part I love.
Yeah. And it all comes down to practice. This is how I talk about thrivability as well. It is a practice, a life practice, and it's an individual and a collective practice. It's not about being an artist. That is vital, but how can we be in a collective practice of an artful life, an artful organization, where we are bringing more beauty? In fact, I have my business card here, the back of which says, a thing is thrivable when it tends to enhance the integrity, beauty, and regenerative capacity of the living community it touches.
Now that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's what the cleaning company
Read it
did.
again.
Yeah, okay. A thing is thrivable when it tends to enhance the integrity, beauty, and regenerative capacity of the living community it touches.
That's gorgeous.
Do you feel that your art has that role when it goes into someone's home? Or
on a very small scale, I do. I resonate with what you've said, in that my days at the easel feel like a practice. It's an art of paying finer attention, and on the surface, it is maybe a superficial thing, easy to call it superficial. Like if I spend 3 hours slowing my mind down to observe how light bounces off a piece of silk, that's on a global scale not a big thing, but it is training me to pay attention to the way the world works in a way. And in my case, looking for beauty in the sort of classical sense. Not all artists. I mean, some artists, their superpower is creating art that's maybe disturbing because they're social justice artists. That's not what I was called to do, but I love that. So it does seem that way. And my clients are mostly one-on-one, and so my pieces generally go into a home or a business, and those individual customers rewardingly seem to report that there is value added to their home, to their community, that they treasure it, that their children. I had an email last week that someone put one of my still lives up in their nursery, and their son likes to hug it and tell it about it.
Oh, I love that.
yeah.
So yes, but I'm also, it's like a broom needs to sweep and a dishwasher needs to wash. I am an artist, and that's what to function well, that's the thing that I am supposed to do. So I would do it anyway. And Nina, that's what you're transitioning to as well. What's your experience of it?
I think for me, and maybe that's because I have this yin and yang between New York City and the Swiss Alps. And since I'm still probably, I mean, not probably, I'm more in New York still. For me, my photography at this point is in search of the the point where it's completely silent or completely quiet or completely mystical. I like to speak about thin places where sort of
Yeah.
this world meets the other world, and that's what I look for in my photography at this point. So I just had an exhibit last summer about New York, and all my pictures about New York were in search of that quiet moment. And people were like,
Huh.
"Where are the masses of New York?" I'm like, "That's not my New York. You know, that's
Mm-hmm.
how I live it or experience it at this point in my life, right?"
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the reasons I probably love going into the Arctic and love being in the Swiss Alps and wait for the clouds and the fog to roll in, because then
Mm-hmm.
there's that mystical moment. So yeah, giving a piece of quiet and respite and thoughtfulness and a a place where you can rest.
Yeah.
I think that is very important to me.
And see how radical that is. Rest is not allowed in the in the mechanistic story. You have to be
Yeah,
productive all the time.
yeah.
And you were talking about that psychology experiment and our inclination, which is taught by the mechanistic story, to look for problems
Yeah.
Yeah.
rather than to look. And I had never thought about that either, Melissa, that there were some who didn't. And
There were some who didn't, more than 20%.
yeah. So there's within this movement that I'm part of, there's an approach to organizations, to businesses called appreciative inquiry, where you recognize that your questions have power. What you pay attention to, what you inquire into, is what you will generate more of. So if we inquire into what draws us, what we find beautiful or intriguing, then that's where the life is. That's where the potential is. And it's not to ignore the problems, but to cultivate and focus on what is alive and full of potential. So I think that may be part of an artist's role as well, to shine a light on things, to see things more deeply than others may be accustomed to or even capable of seeing.
Yeah, I think that's very true.
I also feel like, and maybe I'm being self-righteous in a self-serving way, I don't know, but my hope is that in many people are stuck in a world of churn all the time. It's a privilege to have a choice about how you work. That by, like Nina, providing kernels of beauty and quiet, that you can help make some balance. Like preserving the inquiry into beauty and putting a few more grains on that side of the scales.
Exactly.
I mean, your art is that quiet. I mean, you do still lives. I mean, it's in the name of it, right? I mean, there is a stillness,
It's still.
and yeah, but there's also it, yes, and there's a repose, there's a stillness, and there's also the whimsy in your case, right? And this is what I find is so outstanding about your work, is that yeah, we've got the vase and we've got the feather and we've got the silk draping, and by gosh, there's a little rabbit with wings in the corner, and that is what makes it so delightful, right? Beyond the craftiness of it and the beautiful colors and the balance and all of that, there's just this little sprinkle of magic that is in there, and that I think is what makes it so special.
Thank you.
Me too.
Michelle, you were talking about play, and
I
there
was
is
just about
actually
to
a
bring it up.
principle in Bowen family systems theory that when an ensemble of humans cannot play anymore, that you know that anxiety has taken over.
Oh,
That
okay.
you cannot play genuinely in the presence of too much anxiety. It comes out as sarcasm, or that for wholesome play, it's an indicator of health and an encourager of health.
Yes. It's part of what it is to be mammals. All mammals play. The mechanistic story convinced us that it's the opposite of work,
Yeah.
and
Incompatible.
and yet our experience is or can be that it's the highest form of work, that when it feels like play, this is the sign that we are most creative, we're most able to collaborate and innovate. So this is one of the ways the story is shifting, even in business. I love that invitation into whimsy that your art reminds me of. And we have several pieces from you just outside of this room, including one with 3 women sneaking over a wall to get to the sunflowers. And we've done that. We've done that. So not only
the reason that I made that print, Nina, was because Michelle and her daughter Sunny climbed into a bee's nest infested field with me to steal sunflowers.
So that actually is us.
Yes,
That's the 3 of you. Okay.
we weren't naked, but
yes, we weren't naked.
You weren't naked? Oh, come on.
It's amazing. It's so wonderful. Yeah, we need more whimsy.
Yeah. I appreciate you both mentioning that. Thank you. It makes me really glad.
Yeah.
I wish we could go on a lot longer, but alas, we have 2 final questions that we always love to ask our guests, no matter who they are, what they do. The first one would be, what would you tell an up-and-coming artist how to incorporate this practice of a thrivable world into their everyday life and art?
How to incorporate it into their own practice. I would want to say something about having faith. Like, life is speaking through you. If you're feeling that urge, that call, listen to it. Don't listen to anyone who tells you it's not valid, it's not needed. Life has intention, I believe. So listen, have faith, and know that it's a life practice, that this is an emergent process of evolution and ever deeper participation and belonging. So the more that each of us can connect with others and listen well, the more we can express what's needed in the world and what can only come through us. How does that land as artists? Is that of any use?
That sounds beautiful. Yeah,
it does.
Yeah,
I remember you being generous with your wisdom in Spain, and also reminding me of the importance of providing meaning, of providing narrative, and honoring that work, that task.
I dreamed then that you might share some of your whimsy and your creativity and your zest. This is a word that I think of when I think of you, and that I now use to torment my 19-year-old and 1-year-old children, because they're just about out the door, and we're about to be empty nesters. But I like to say to them, we're going to be zesty nesters. And they say, ew.
Yeah.
So I, of course, say it all the time. But
I will now adopt it.
I want to be zesty.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you are an inspiration in that, Melissa. And Nina,
you.
if I got to know you better, I'm sure you would be too. So.
She would be. She is to me.
Well, ditto. We mutual love fest. Yes, absolutely.
Nice.
And then we're just curious, what are a couple of art pieces in your home or your office or your home office that you are specifically proud of or attached to, or that light you up?
You have a lovely sculpture behind you on the wall.
I do. This I got at a market, open air market in Vietnam, and lugged it home. It was quite an ordeal to have it shipped, but I loved it. It called to me, and I feel that it is this wise woman voice that speaks to me here, always over my shoulder, and I can see it in my screen, behind me. And it intrigues people who I'm on calls with. So that's definitely a good one. Yeah. I never got to meet the artist. The pieces that we have from you, Melissa, I would say are even in higher regard because
Oh,
I know the spirit that went into them as well. But I feel some of the spirit here too.
I do too.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my favorites are definitely the pieces that I have relationships with the
Right.
artists with. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then a few from my daughter, actually. She's done
Good.
some stunning pieces. Yeah, I find them stunning. So,
I hope when you get a moment, you'll send a snapshot.
all right. Good.
What's your medium?
She's pencil. She does pencil drawings most. She does a whole lot of things, but yeah. And is there, Melissa, do you have a piece? Could you possibly answer that question that really moves you?
Well, one of the amazing parts of my life is that I have a rotating exhibition and
Right.
get to change them all the time. So on any given day of the week, that would be different. But for the last 2 years or so, it's been this monumental piece by my husband, Dowd.
Mhm.
And it looks like a woman on top of flames, and she is. But when you get closer to the piece, it's enormous. It's 7 feet tall or something. Underneath those flames, there are men carrying her on a pier, and the flames are not burning the pier. The flames are torches for light. And her name is Veritas. She's the truth. And people are carrying her through the night. And you don't really know if they're going to burn her or if they're saving her or they're championing her or it's a ritual. But the importance of truth in this piece, and then it's just so beautifully painted that I love having it in our home. And someday it may find another job to do in another place, but it's a big image in my life, and that's why it's in the middle of the living room, which is also the only place it would fit.
Wonderful. Thank you for telling that story. Mhm.
It's a dream come true that you would come and talk with us. For me and for Nina, the show is Nina's idea, and she's helped me learn how to do it. But for me, it's been an opportunity to have conversations that are meaningful for me with people whom I respect, in company with Nina, whom I adore and admire, and then I get to share it with others who are interested. So it really is a thing that regenerates me. Thank you.
Very good. Me too. It's a dream come true. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Michelle. This has been really, really lovely. And thank you for asking us questions, which we normally don't get. So that's a lovely part.
Can we send people to your website?
Yes, that would be wonderful. There's michelleholliday.com. That's just about me. And Thrivable World is an emerging platform for conversation, resources, gatherings, courses, other contributors. So either of those, thrivableworld.com.
Perfect.
Excellent. We'll put that in the so-called show notes.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Michelle. Thank you for a great conversation and for an enlightening conversation. And I just love how I'm sort of feeling like I might be a little part of this in a way. So I really, really enjoyed this. So thank you so much.
You are.
And for those of you who did join us, we did get a couple of comments. Thank you so much for tuning in with us. And if you're watching this on a replay, you can still always ask questions. So please ask your questions away in the comments, and we'll get back to you for sure with the answers. And thank you so much for watching An Artful Life. And we'll see you again in a month from now with another fabulous guest. And until then, be well. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I have to find the end button. There we go.